Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question asks if I can analyze the mental health and personality characteristics that may be at work in the John Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo murder case. These two are better known as the Beltway Snipers. Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoy this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I'll put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. I'm going to go through the timeline, then the investigation, then look at the mental health and personality factors at the same time as the backgrounds of both individuals. So starting with the timeline, we move to October 2, 2002. The window is shot out at a craft store in Aspen Hill, Maryland. No one is injured. Not even 1 hour later, a 55-year-old male is shot and killed in Wheaton, Maryland. The next day, there are 5 more shootings. 4 in Maryland in the morning starting at 7:41 a.m. and 1 in Washington, D.C. at 9:15 p.m. The victims are engaging in everyday activities, mowing the lawn, putting gas in their car, sitting on a bench, vacuuming a minivan, and crossing the street. All 5 victims are killed. October 4, 2:30 p.m. A 43-year-old mother of 2 is wounded in Virginia. A 13-year-old is wounded in Maryland 3 days later. October 9, a man is killed at a gas station in Virginia. It happens again 2 days later at another gas station in Virginia. October 14, 9:15 p.m. A 47-year-old female is killed in a Home Depot parking lot in Virginia. October 19, 8 p.m., a 19-year-old is wounded in Virginia. And then on October 23, at 5:56 a.m., a 35-year-old male is killed while standing on the top step of his bus. This was in Maryland. Now moving to the investigation. There were a number of reports about what was at the scenes. We see descriptions of a white van, a white box truck, and a blue Chevrolet Caprice. There was a tarot card left at one scene and then a note demanding money with an invalid phone number. Evidence was uncovered that led the police to Lee Boyd Malvo, a 17-year-old from Jamaica. Malvo had been seen with a man named John Muhammad during a shooting at a residence in Tacoma, Washington. October 23, the police released information on the car John was driving, a 1990 Chevrolet Caprice. The next day, John Muhammad and Lee Malvo were arrested near Frederick, Maryland, after a motorist spotted that car in a rest area. There was a hole in the trunk, and the back seat was modified so a person could be in a prone position and fire a weapon through that hole. One firearm was recovered, a Bushmaster XM15, which is basically an M4 carbine. It fires at .223. Lee was not cooperative in custody. He attempted to escape custody before being interviewed. He didn't really talk too much. He drew letters on the wall and on the table, and he nodded. Eventually, though, he took responsibility for the criminal acts and said he would do it again. Both individuals were tried in Virginia because in that state there was a better chance they would not only receive the death penalty, but actually be executed. John was found guilty and eventually sentenced to death. He was executed November 10, 2009. Lee was found guilty and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. He confessed to murders in Maryland as well and was sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences without parole. After a series of unsuccessful appeals, Virginia changed the law so that any offender sentenced as a juvenile was to be eligible for parole after 20 years. Lee will become eligible for parole in 2022, but that's just in Virginia. He still has those other life sentences in Maryland to consider. Now moving to the backgrounds of both individuals and the mental health and personality factors. So here I'm weaving them together in this section. I will cover the backgrounds of both shooters, but focus more on the mental health characteristics that may be going on in a case like Lee Boyd Malvo. John was executed, so obviously nobody's able to communicate with him, and when he was alive, he really didn't reveal a lot about his mental state. Lee Boyd Malvo, on the other hand, is really quite different. He played an active part in his defense as they tried to spare him the death penalty. He went from being completely callous and somewhat unresponsive to claiming to have remorse. So moving to the background of John Muhammad. John Muhammad was born John Allen Williams on December 31, 1960 in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. His mother died when he was 3, and he lived with his aunt and his grandfather. He He joined the Louisiana Army National Guard in 1978, moving to the Army in 1985. He served in the Gulf War and earned an expert rifleman's badge using an M16. At some point he married. It didn't work out. He married again and had 3 children. He kidnapped his children and moved to Antigua in 2000. That's where he met Lee Boyd Malvo. When John was there, he was regarded by the residents as friendly, mechanically oriented, intelligent, helpful, charismatic, and outgoing. He started a little business where he was forging U.S. immigration documents, charging between $1,000 and $3,000. He changed his name to John Allen Muhammad in 2001. The police were closing in on John due to his illegal document business and also those custody problems he had. This is apparently what motivated him to leave there and go to the United States. He made his way to Washington State. He enrolled his children in school, but his second wife had obtained a no-fault divorce and full custody of the children. So when their names came up as being registered for school, the police were able to pick up the children. She would move to a suburb in Washington, D.C., and John would frantically search for his children for some time. John was distraught, apparently crying for days on end. Many believe this became the motivation for his crimes. He wanted to kill his wife in order to get custody of the children. So with John Muhammad, we see someone who's intelligent, mechanically oriented, well-disciplined, extroverted, but we also see some antisocial traits, like being irresponsible and committing crimes. After John was arrested, he was unrepentant, saying only that he had found the weapon 12 hours before. So he was saying that it wasn't his rifle. Now, of course, this is a familiar occurrence for many people. You go out driving, you find a rifle, you keep it in your car for 12 hours without telling anybody. Nothing out of the ordinary here. It seems clear that John was the mastermind of the murders. But what remains a bit of a mystery is why Lee followed him, which brings me to Lee's background. Lee Boyd Malvo was born on February 18, 1985 in Kingston, Jamaica. Lee's mother was very rigid and used harsh discipline. She was aggressive, overbearing, dominant, and highly intelligent. Lee's father was quite permissive, protecting Lee from being held accountable by his mother. So it sounds like essentially the dynamic was that Lee's mother was quite harmful to him, and Lee's father protected him. Eventually, the relationship between Lee's mother and father disintegrated. Lee's father punched his mother in the jaw and knocked out one of her teeth. The next day, she attacked him from behind with a machete, cutting his wrist. This sheds light on the lesser-known machete stage of a relationship. There's passion, disillusionment, machete, and companionate stages. Relationships typically perform better without the machete stage. After moving a few times, Lee ended up in Antigua in 1999, and of course, this is where he met John Allen Muhammad in 2000. Lee was sick at the time, and the two developed a friendship after John nursed Lee back to health. Eventually, we see that John makes an effort to isolate Lee from Lee's family. Lee entered the United States illegally in 2001. He made his way with John to Bellingham, Washington, and enrolled in high school by listing John as his father. Not long after this, in Tacoma, Washington, Lee shoplifts a Bushmaster XM15. I can't imagine a gun store with such poor security that somebody could just take a rifle and put it under a coat and walk out. So I'm not really sure that's exactly how it happened, but either way, apparently Lee did steal that weapon. February 16, 2002, Tacoma, Washington, John orders Lee to kill a woman with whom he is angry, but Lee ends up shooting and killing her niece instead. John and Lee would commit many more crimes before they started the Beltway shootings. During the time they were together, John convinced Lee that they could commit the shootings and extort money from the government, which they could then use to start a new country in Canada. That new country could recruit orphans who could then carry out more shootings. I never really heard what they were going to name this new country, but Delusionville seems like an appropriate choice. At the trial, this case really takes a familiar path. The prosecution experts essentially say that Lee knew right from wrong. He was inquisitive and intelligent, not impressionable, not gullible. He was not weak-minded. On cross-examination, one of the prosecution witnesses admitted that he had interviewed hundreds of criminals and always came to the conclusion that they knew the difference between right and wrong. Lee had a long history of criminal behavior. He shot cats with a slingshot, shoplifted many times to the point where it created a steady income for him. He had a short temper, and he was violent. He was involved in a number of fights that he initiated. He claimed that he just snapped, and he didn't know what he was doing when he got involved in those fights. The defense experts said that Lee had dissociated. He was brainwashed by John Muhammad. He did not know right from wrong. So they were looking to establish legal insanity. They made it seem like Lee was in a cult with just two people. Lee had watched the movie The Matrix over 100 times. He pictured John as the Morpheus character and himself as Thomas Anderson, later known as Neo, the protagonist of the movie. The defense said that violent video games also contributed to Lee's criminal behavior. They said John essentially trained Lee to be a killer, taking him to the range, sometimes for 12 hours at a time, and shooting targets, imagining that they were real people. There's no way to know which theory is correct, but the evidence seems to support the idea that Lee had characteristics of psychopathy. The whole idea of brainwashing and dissociation is really quite hard to prove. Certainly Lee looked up to John, he respected him, he wanted to be like him, and this mitigates culpability to some degree. But the whole idea that he was dissociating really just doesn't fit with the circumstances. It makes more sense that Lee was a willing participant. John found somebody who was predisposed to serious criminal activity and encouraged him. Lee was a sensation seeker with antisocial tendencies. Therefore, when he was presented with the opportunity to become a murderer, he was more than happy to comply. His apparent remorse at this point could be genuine or it could be manipulation. He knows what he needs to do to look more favorable. He has some hope of getting out of prison, although I'd be extremely surprised if that ever happened. But either way, he might believe he can get out, so he takes on a more socially acceptable position. I think the evidence supports that these two were just a bad combination. Maybe John turned to murder because he knew he had a partner that could help him. Maybe he snapped and he would have committed murder either way. So in that case, Lee was just unfortunate enough to be right there with him. Again, it's difficult to know. I think what happens in these trials is that ordinary events are presented as if they are unusual, like watching one movie a lot of times or playing video games excessively. Any particular person's history of behavior is going to seem different from that of others. Many people watch the same movie over and over and play video games, but the mental health experts that testify have a way of making just another history into something that must lead to a terrible crime. It appears the only thing someone needs to do to establish an insanity defense is to engage in unusual behaviors before committing a crime. Although, as we see in this case, trying to successfully establish an insanity defense is very difficult. If we extend this defense tactic a little bit more, we see flaws become apparent. For example, what if somebody, instead of watching The Matrix 100 times, watched every episode of Gilligan's Island 100 times? I suppose that point is moot, though, because that activity may not be survivable. The last part I want to look at with these crimes is the personality profiles that were generated when the crimes were ongoing. So we see when the shooting started in Maryland, mental health experts from all over the place were talking about how the killer was a white male working alone who had a history of troubled relationships with women, kind of the typical serial killer profile. They came up with all these different theories about the perpetrator's personality. He was disorganized, impulsive, never held down a steady job. He had an extensive criminal history. He was choosing his victims to satisfy some sort of unconscious drive. As it turns out, of course, there were two killers, one from the Caribbean and one who was African American. They essentially selected their targets at random, and they did not physically touch any of the victims. They never had contact with the bodies. It's disappointing how many mental health experts weighed in and equated these criminals with serial killers. Yes, technically, what they did was serial killing, but that doesn't mean the personality profile would be similar. The victims were shot from a distance, and this is not how serial killers work. The vast majority of serial killers that use a firearm use handguns, like David Berkowitz, the son of Sam, Eileen Wuornos, or Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. In all of these cases, victims were targeted, and the shots were fired at extremely close range. There have been other killers like John Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo, But this behavior is much different than the typical serial killer. Those are my thoughts on the Beltway Snipers. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comments section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be interesting. Thanks for watching. If somebody watched every episode of The Love Boat 100 times, would they murder people by making them watch every episode of The Love Boat? That's really just too horrible to imagine. I can't put that in. That's bad. Love Boat. Whew. Somebody watched every episode of MacGyver over 100 times. Would they kill people using a bomb made of a paperclip, a rubber band, and a potato?